Well, hey everyone! Welcome to episode 358 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I'm happy to bring you a rising star in the nature photography space and one of the co-hosts of the popular YouTube channel, Bruis and Views, Mike DiMeola. Mike is a physician in Vermont who is in love with nature photography. Learn about his rise and the things that he's done to succinctly improve his photography in a short amount of time. Today, I have yet another favor to ask you. If you haven't already, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts? It really helps the podcast get discovered by new listeners. Thanks so much. Okay, let's get to this week's episode with Mike DiMeola. All right, Mike DiMeola, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Awesome, Matt. Yeah, it's awesome to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like your name comes up all the time when I ask people for recommendations for the podcast, so we're finally making it happen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm always kind of floored when I hear my name thrown out there. I think when Bill Neal said my name, I almost drove off the road. Always an honor to have people recommend me, and it's an honor to know that they appreciate my work. So definitely happy to be here.
Yeah, right on. Well, I mean, I like your work quite a bit, so it's been really fun watching your journey as a photographer and to see what you've been doing with your photography. So looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Me as well. Thanks.
Awesome, man. Well, for the people who don't know who you are, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So we'll kind of hit the basics here. So 44 years old. I live in central Vermont. Pretty much smack in the center of the state, right near Killington, if people are familiar with the area. Yeah, not married, no kids. I'm not a full-time photographer. I am probably what you would call a very passionate hobbyist. I'm most of the time, I'd say at least 2 to 3 times a week, I'm out with my camera on some form or fashion. So I really do, not full-time. I am out there quite a bit with it. And I think that kind of, in a lot of ways, kind of speaks to my approach to photography. So yeah, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Definitely, interested in kind of smaller scene, intimate scene type photography. I'm sure we'll get into that a bit later on.
Yeah.
That's kind of the basics.
And when you're not making images, what are you doing?
All right. So yeah, my full-time job is I'm a physician, an anesthesiologist. I've been doing that. I graduated medical school in 2008. Was in the Army for a little while. As a physician, I did my training through the military, so I was stationed down in Texas for a bit. Originally from New England, so southern New England, and when I got out of the military, I moved back up here to Vermont. I always said the only place I would want to move if I moved back to the East Coast was Vermont, so made that happen. I'm glad I did.
Yeah, right on. Well, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that side of things.
Definitely.
What originally sparked your interest in picking up a camera, and how did you eventually transition into nature photography?
Yeah, I think with like all the best things, it kind of happened in an unplanned sort of way. So when I was down in Texas, I've always been into off-roading, and a good friend of mine, I was in a club, a good friend of mine had a business where he was building up Jeeps, and he would take people out on these tours and kind of do instructional stuff. And so I was an instructor for him. So I was teaching people how to, drive their Jeeps, and this really kind of took off. And so they wanted to do some promotional stuff for it, get it on their website, get some photos. And up to that point, so this is 2011 or so, 2010, we were using cell phones. So the cameras back then weren't as good.
Right.
So it kind of came up, we need some better photos. And I happened to have this camera that had been kind of sitting around my house. I had no idea what to do with it. And I was like, hey, I've got this camera. It's a Canon, I think it was like a Rebel T3 or something with a kit lens. I was like, I got this camera. I could take some sweet pictures with this thing. And so, lo and behold, I obviously had no idea what I was doing. And lo and behold, the pictures really didn't look that much different than the ones that were coming off the cell phone. So then it kind of engaged me a little bit, and reached out to some people who were doing similar photography in the area and talked to them about it, and they kind of introduced me to the concept of editing photos maybe a little bit. It was very cursory. And so I started playing around with that, not even on a Lightroom level yet, just kind of like a plug-in sort of thing that just applied filters. And that then it kind of became fun, because now I could take this photo that didn't really look great initially, and I can make it better. And I think that it kind of also introduced me to the concept of how photography can make other people feel, and how you can kind of, create emotions in people or to elicit a response, because people love seeing themselves driving their Jeeps, doing this awesome stuff. And if I could, the filter, I cringe when I say this now, but the filter that I always used in this app was the HDR filter. So, it would, blow up and everything was saturated and clouds would look cool and stuff. And I mean, so out there on this website, there's some horrible pictures that I took around 2011, if anybody wants to see them. But so anyway, but it got me kind of like in that mindset of like, I could produce this, I could, make these images and people will enjoy them, on some level. And so that really kind of planted the seed. I didn't really do very much with it other than that for the next couple of years. It was just, kit lens, taking photos, run them through this filter, giving them to my friend to throw up on his Facebook page, and that was about it. But I got out of the military and moved from Texas to Vermont, and all of a sudden I wasn't taking pictures of Jeeps anymore, but I'd grown pretty fond of using my camera. And so I just kind of started, well, it wasn't even really when I first moved to Vermont. There's probably a good year and a half where I really wasn't doing anything, just transitioning out of the military and stuff. So about 2017, I started kind of just picking up the camera again, and I was in this new place, Vermont. I've always loved Vermont, and so it was fun to capture. It's a unique place, and a lot of history and rural scenes, and I love rural environments. I'm not a city person at all, so it was fun to capture that because it was kind of new to me at that time, and that's really when I started playing around with it. So initially, my earlier photographs were very kind of rural based, like barns, fences, cows, stone walls, sheep, like that.
Yeah.
And then, over the years, I kind of slowly transitioned into more nature photography as I started to explore it, as I started to learn more, reach out, network with people, and really start looking at photographs.
That was something I was really curious about for you because you're working as a doctor, you've got this camera, you're like, dabbling here and there with nature photography, but
Yep.
then you like quickly found kind of what your preference was in terms of your style and the types of subjects
Yep.
that you like to photograph, which is, I would say it's fairly niche, right?
Yep.
So how did you come to find yourself within that niche of kind of smaller, more minimalistic scenes, and how did you get yourself the skill sets in order to capture those scenes the way that you do?
Well, thank you. So it's tough for me to name it's tough for me to answer that very discreetly, but there are a couple of things that stand out when I think back on it. Number one, in 2017, I took a trip to Ireland, not a photography trip. It was a family trip at that time, and I found myself in this gallery in Kinsale, Ireland, just totally by chance. And it was Rohan Riley's gallery. I had no idea who he was at the time. You're probably familiar with him. He's a fantastic photographer. And I walked in there and I was absolutely taken aback by the quality of his work. And if you're familiar with his work, it has a very minimalist sort of appeal to it. Very simple scenes. He does a lot of very long exposure type of photography. And I was absolutely blown away. And I was the only one in there, and he happened to be there. And so I spent a bunch of time talking with him. He was very gracious with his time and answered all of my stupid questions. I didn't even know what long exposure was at that point, how he was doing that. And he explained it all to me in detail. And so that really did kind of set me off down this road. And so I spent the rest of the trip trying to make photos like he did. But I didn't have I didn't even have ND filters or anything. So, but it really did inspire me. And I think that aesthetic, as soon as I saw it, and especially as soon as I saw it printed in big, that aesthetic has always stuck with me. And it was something about the simplicity and the calmness of it, and how these images that can be so, I don't want to say lacking a subject, but just so simple, can still be so evocative. More so than, in my opinion anyway, more so than a huge vast landscape and sunrise, sunset, ocean, whatever. And so that really kind of drew me in. And so from that point on, I really started looking into that type of photography, or pursuing that type of photography, trying to emulate it, as we all do when we're first learning. So that was definitely a kind of, I would say, a seminal moment in my development. And even though I'm talk with Rohan every once in a while now, he knows none of this. So when he's hearing this, maybe he's hearing it for the first time. But I appreciate it, Rohan. You're an awesome photographer and a huge inspiration. And then, beyond that, he kind of went to the grand landscapes, as I'm like, all right, I'm really going to start doing this nature photography thing. And, a lot of people as a lot of people do, they start looking at grand landscapes, and it just wasn't for me. I really didn't like, first of all, I didn't really like editing those photos.
It is different for sure.
It really is, and I don't like editing, period. It's probably my least favorite part of photography. And so that was just kind of another notch in the pro column for intimate scene photography, because the editing is usually a bit more limited. You're not blending exposures. I mean, maybe you're doing a focus stack or something, but like I was able to spend more time focusing on the aesthetics, the composition, just searching around me, looking for things rather than blending exposures and chasing light and all of that. And I still do that every once in a while. I mean, a good sunset's a good sunset, but I think that the tail end of it, the editing portion of it, kind of steered me more towards kind of simpler scenes, minimalist scenes, and intimate landscapes.
So you developed a preference and a predilection towards those smaller minimalistic scenes. What steps did you then take to try to hone your skills in that area? Or maybe were there certain photographers that you kind of discovered? Or I'm just curious, what were the things that you tried to do to get better?
Yeah, great question. So the biggest thing is just taking in photography. I was just absolutely voracious in my appetite for consuming other people's photography. Obviously, Instagram's an easy way to do that. Not the best way, but it's an easy way to do that. Then I started buying photography books, and it wasn't even really just nature photography. I'm enthralled with photography in all of its forms: street photography, portraiture, very abstract stuff. I have books on all of it, and I love all of it. And so really, when I started going down that road, I just started consuming a ton of it. And not just scrolling, on Instagram. I would really spend some time and try to, understand what it was that I liked about it, or draw comparisons to, photographer A and photographer B. I like both of their work, but they're different. What are the commonalities? And through that, I kind of started to develop my own aesthetic and develop my own eye for when I was out with my camera, things that I was looking for. So I think that was by far the biggest thing. I definitely did a bunch of workshops, very selectively, both private and group workshops. And through that, I've developed, mentorships and things like that have really, really helped me, which, I think we'll talk about maybe a bit later on. But that was another thing, workshops. And, overall, just constantly being curious, and always wanting to learn. Just never being like, okay, I've arrived. I know how to do this. I figured it out. And so, that's another thing that, I've just always had that curiousness and that willingness to learn. And to this day, just as much as I did 3-4 years ago when I got going doing this.
All right. Well, cool. That makes a lot of sense. And like you said, we will talk more about that, some of the specifics of that later.
Sure.
I wanted to go back and talk a little bit more about the relationship between, your evocation as a doctor and the type of work you do as a doctor, and how do you balance that with photography, and how important is the photography side of things to kind of keep you sane at work?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that the importance of photography, I don't want to be too melodramatic about it, but it was borderline life-saving in terms of the role that it played in balancing out my being, really. The type of physician I am is an anesthesiologist, so everybody, I'm sure most people know what that is, but that's about it. The guy who puts you to sleep. There's beyond that, most people don't understand what anesthesiologists do. Most physicians, honestly, don't understand what anesthesiologists do. Everybody knows what an orthopedic surgeon does. So most anesthesiologists are very type A, and I am type A to the extreme when I'm at work. I always kind of say that if the people that know me outside of work, like in the photography realm, if they saw me at work, would not recognize me. I am a completely different person in my approach to doing things and getting things done, and vice versa. People that know me at work, if they saw me interacting, with my camera outside with a bunch of friends or whatever, it's complete dichotomy there.
Right. Who's that guy?
So, yeah, exactly. And that's the way it needs to be. I mean, when somebody comes to me, or they come to their surgeon, and I'm there to get them through this surgery, I'm in complete control over their body, that whether they realize it or not. And that is not something that I take lightly, that any anesthesiologist takes lightly. And so there is zero room for error. Absolutely zero room for error. So you have to be 100% on top of your game. You have to be very scripted, do things the exact same way every time, or at least as much as you can. And you're constantly on. Like when I'm in the operating room, I'm constantly on. I'm listening. I'm taking in. It's kind of sensory overload, but you learn how to manage it. But when you do that day in, day out, sometimes very long weeks, 60, 80-hour weeks, 24 hours of call every few days, it can really, really wear on you. And having that mindset and that very strict, very rigid, very type A mentality, for me anyway, some people probably make that work. I couldn't make it work. It was really having negative effects on me. It wasn't, I wouldn't say like I was depressed, but I wasn't functioning well. I would leave work and I wouldn't be motivated to do anything. And I would get very frustrated with simple little things because in my work environment, I could control everything. I could have everything exactly the way it is. Well, that's not the way life works, right? So I needed something to create that balance, to allow me to step away from work, let my mind rest. And that's ultimately the role that photography filled. I've probably always had, I can say I've always had a drive to find some kind of creative catharsis and creative outlet. When I was younger, I tried writing fiction. That was a horrible endeavor. There's really not much else, drawing. So I couldn't do really anything else artistic. So photography has been such a gift for me in that sense, to discover it, to allow it to fill that creative void, which really balances everything out. And it's done wonders for me. I mean, in my professional career, personal life, everything. So it's been a perfect kind of yin and yang sort of thing. Very important to me.
So what you just described is almost like Mr. Jekyll and Hyde or whatever. It's like, why do you suppose it's so opposite when it comes to your approach to making images?
So I will say there is some bleed over. Well, so first of all, it's partly intentional. When I first started photography, it was all about gear and all about timing, and and I wasn't getting quite what I wanted out of it, and so I realized that, and so I shifted my approach a little bit, and forced myself, made a conscious effort to just step back and not worry about necessarily being in the exact right place right when the sun is rising and the Milky Way overhead and all that stuff. And just kind of taking my time with it and enjoying it and noticing small things and most importantly, slowing down. So it took some conscious effort, but then that became a habit, and that just kind of became my MO when I was in the field. And it just so happens to be very opposite of the way I am at work. And, maybe if I had a different job, I would kind of balance the two, like maybe relax a little bit at work and, maybe put a little bit more type A effort into my photography. I don't know, but I don't feel like I can't step off that gas pedal at work. Like I need to have that mindset at work. I demand a lot of myself. I demand a lot of my staff. I think that's kind of created the dichotomy.
Well, and it's interesting because if you think about it, in the work you do as a doctor, I'm assuming you're kind of used to like, okay, if I do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, E, F, G, the results are going to be this. Probably most of the time, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But in photography, you can do all of those things and the results won't match what your expectations are most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So it's like if that's your approach and you're used to it working, it's not going to work when you try to do it with photography, at least not as much, not as often.
Correct. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I there was definitely a period of time when I was getting very frustrated with photography because of that. It was like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. Because that's the way I've accomplished everything in my life, is just like knuckle down, learn the details, don't leave any stone unturned, just get after it. It's not really the way photography works. But as I mentioned before, there is some bleed over. So like with my print, like when I print, I'm very detail oriented.
I can see that.
So I have a stack of about 600 test prints over here, just because the tiniest little thing is off, and it's like no. So there's a little bit of bleed over there, but at least in my approach, my philosophy towards photography is very different than my professional one.
I love that. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the importance of photographing closer to home. I know
Yeah.
that the majority of your photography is very close to where you live there in Vermont. I'm curious, why have you taken that approach as opposed to going on lots of longer trips?
So fortunately, I'm blessed to live in what I think is one of the more beautiful states in the country. I love everything about Vermont. It's got something to offer all 4 seasons of the year from a photography perspective. So the simplest answer to that is it's easy. Like I don't have to go far, and I can find stuff that's worth photographing. But diving a little bit deeper, I think I'm always thinking about photography. Driving to work, I'm looking at trees, like how would I compose that? My mind just is really never off of photography, or very rarely is it off of photography. And I think that's a good exercise. And so when I do have free time, I just grab my camera, and all these things that I see on a daily basis that in my mind I'm mentally composing, I try to play around with it. I think that there was a podcast you did, I think it was with Nick Becker, and you were talking about because he's from St. Louis. He's a friend of mine. He photographs a lot in St. Louis, which is not really a huge photography destination. But you guys were
Right.
talking back and forth about that, and how even if the images that you're making are not amazing portfolio, 1,000 likes on Instagram type of images, the practice of just seeing compositions and framing them up in your camera, pressing the shutter, maybe edit them, maybe not, is so important in terms of developing that skill, because it's a skill like anything else. The more you do it, the more you practice, the better you get. Just seeing creatively, not even just the act of making images, but just seeing creatively. And I think the point from that podcast that really resonated with me was that if you do that close to home and you do it on a very regular basis, even if the pictures aren't anything amazing, when you do get to someplace amazing, when you do get to Death Valley or the Oregon coast or the Rockies or wherever, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, because you're just so used to seeing compositions, and you're training your mind to think creatively and to see things creatively and to experiment and be curious, and so you just kind of hit the ground running when you do get to those places that are maybe a little bit more traditionally photogenic. So kind of with those two things in mind, I always make it a point to photograph whenever I can, and sometimes I might only have a couple of hours on a Saturday morning, and so I'll just go out and photograph whatever's nearby. I'll throw on my macro lens and kind of wander through the woods and the wildflowers around my house or something like that.
And when you go out, is it an intentional act of engaging in photography, or are you the type of person that kind of just carries your camera and sees what happens?
Oh, good question. Maybe a little bit of both. Probably more intentional. I don't when I'm going. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, it's definitely more intentional. If I have a Saturday morning free, I'm going out with my camera. My mindset is just taking photographs. I'm not somebody who's like, oh, I'm going to go on a hike. I'll bring my camera. Maybe I'll take it out. Maybe I won't. That's not really me. If I'm going out to take photos, I'm going out to take photos. And I may not take photos if I don't see anything worth photographing, which is
Sure.
somewhat of a recent development, and I think a part of my maturation process. But yeah, no, I think it's definitely more intentional.
No, yeah, that makes total sense. Well, speaking of your maturation process, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the importance of mentorship, and how that's played a role in your photography and how you've been able to elevate your work in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, mentorship is huge. There's a number of people that I consider influences on my career, or I can't call it a career, my hobby, or however you want to phrase it. But kind of foremost among them is TJ Thorne. We spent a week camping. It was essentially a private workshop. It was September of 2020, so right when COVID panic hysteria was at an all-time high. And I needed to get out of town, and he agreed to do a private workshop with me. We were going to do something down around Crater Lake, but Crater Lake was on fire. It was absolute calamity between COVID and fires and riots. It was just the worst time possible that you could think to go to Oregon. But I went, and it was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made, because we ended up going up to the Olympic National Park. and the whole rainforest there, and spent like 3-4 days just hiking through the national park, going down to the shore, and definitely made some good images there, and learned a lot about photography. But by far and away, the biggest impact that trip had on me was just the hours at night when we would just like sit there and just talk about photography, talk about creativity, talk about our lives, and he imparted so much to me about how to think creatively and how to view things, and his general approach, that just it absolutely lit a fire under me, and really started, when I talk about, kind of changing my approach, that was really the time when that happened the most. Before that, I kind of wandered around. I was still taking a lot of pictures of fence posts and things like that. But after that trip, I was really kind of honed in on nature and developing a connection with nature and having that reflect in my work. I hadn't really been exposed to that element of it until I met TJ. So he's been hugely helpful in that regard. So definitely, if anybody listening could ever get on a workshop with TJ, private one is awesome. It'll be a worthwhile experience, I promise you, because it's had a tremendous impact on me.
Does that mean we can now call TJ an influencer?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure he'll appreciate that.
I was gonna say, I bet he'll love that.
Yeah, no, TJ's a great guy. We still talk quite a bit here and there, and cross paths, about once a year. So. His mentorship's been huge. I mean, the other cool thing is I've, very recently, somebody I work with, son, a friend of mine's son is a 16, 17-year-old kid who's really started getting into nature photography, and he's super passionate about it. And so I've kind of like flipped the script now a little bit, and I'm very informally mentoring him, and we've gone out a couple of times, and it's fun to see his enthusiasm, and his passion for it. I think it's unfortunately something that's fairly rare in 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds these days. But just even that, like, his energy kind of comes back to me, and it's been a pretty rewarding thing. Not that I've done that much with him, but it's been a pretty rewarding thing to watch him develop and work with him a little bit and share that experience with him. So mentorship, I think, is super important.
Absolutely. And I think if you find that right connection, it can really turbocharge your development.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So your work has definitely changed.
Oh, for sure.
Over the past couple of years. So what do you, and maybe you've talked about this before, so if we're kind of beating a dead horse, we don't have to linger on it, but what do you think caused your change? Is it influence of other people, or is it your own desire to kind of change your approach?
For me, it's a huge mixture of things. I mean, big time, I've had really close friends that I've spent a lot of time with them, and also just studying their approach to photography and their approach to editing and things like that, including people like Sarah Marino and Jimmy Gekas and Ron Koskaroska and Alex Noriega. Like just watching how they work and understanding their approach to making images, and like wanting my own work to be of similar quality and caliber has definitely made an influence on me. Definitely spending time with Eric Bennett has helped me a little bit. And then of course, I think this podcast, I mean, I've had so many awesome conversations with so many incredible photographers, and every single person I talk to has kind of rubbed off on me a little bit here and there. So I think it's a mixture of those things. And then, as you mentioned too, the intent side is important as well, like wanting your work to go in a certain direction, and then taking steps to actually force yourself down that path. I think that's important too.
Absolutely. So do you feel a sense of a difference in the sense of satisfaction with like a really good grand landscape versus or what you would consider to be a really good grand landscape and a really good intimate scene? Do you have a differential sense of satisfaction between the two?
Oh,
personally?
I mean, I love both of them. I love the smaller scenes for the reason that it's like they're found, like you had to kind of construct it and have a little chat with it and figure it out and things like that. So I like smaller scenes from that perspective, and you can instill a little bit more of yourself into them. But the grand landscapes, for me, a lot of times that's just like you're witnessing the awesome power of nature, and it's more about the moment and but I don't chase those nearly as much as I used to. So, if I'm in a place and it's happening and I can get it, that's cool. But I don't find myself like spending hours and hours and hours trying to get those shots anymore. But I still like photographing them when I can.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess the reason why I asked is because, so I was just out in September. I was out in Badlands. I just took a trip by myself out there, and that type of place is pretty conducive to both types of photography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I probably took a relatively even number of what you would consider grand landscapes, sun, sky, clouds, all that stuff, versus more dedicated photos of the rock formations. And I think I probably put out 2 or 3 of the larger ones, because I look at them and I could objectively say, like, they're decent photographs, right? But there's just nothing, to me, there's nothing in the grand landscape ones that's just like, yeah, that's you, So like it's like there's almost this differential sense of satisfaction.
Right. It doesn't have the same quality of soul and,
yeah,
intent.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I agree. I mean, like I said, I still like photographing those scenes, and
right.
If you put me in front of a scene like that and I'm got my camera, I'm pretty excited. Mm-hmm. But to your point, when I'm looking at those photos, it just doesn't have the same impact, at least for me as the creator, as say
right.
something that I had found and I had to make sense of and I had to spend more time with, and I had to arrange the elements more cohesively. I don't know. There's something to it. It's hard to put my finger on it, though.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. Well, good. It's good to know I'm not completely alone in that.
No, you're not. I think that's part of the journey, too.
Sure, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, the grand landscapes, they always take me back to a moment. Like, I like that aspect of creating those images, because I know when I look back on the photo, I can be like, oh man, that was such an awesome evening or whatever.
Yep.
But that's it. Like, it doesn't usually have more substance to it.
Right. Yeah. No, I gotcha. So yeah, I guess I kind of feel the same way. But you also I think you put a lot more effort into your grand landscapes than I do, because you're climbing mountains and dark and all that stuff, where I don't really do that.
For sure. I mean, I definitely have in the past. I mean, I'd say over the last 5 years, it's definitely more like 80% small and intimate versus 20% grand.
Right.
Yeah. But I still put some effort into it.
Nice. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about winter photography. I know you absolutely love photographing in winter. What is it about winter that you love? What is it about winter subjects that pulls you in?
So I've always loved winter as a season. I'm a cold weather person. I don't really like heat. I like to visit it, every once in a while, but that's about it. So I've just always loved winter. Been in, winter sports, everything my entire life. So it's just kind of natural in that sense. But I think more kind of photographically speaking, I think winter scenes just kind of lend themselves to the type of photography that appeals to me most, which again is that kind of minimalist sort of aesthetic. Because you can look at a field with some trees in it or something like that in the summers you never even pay attention to, but you coat it in some snow and all of a sudden isolate one of those trees and get this very evocative scene that's very peaceful and calming. And that's probably the thing I chase for the most, or the effect that I would want my photographs to have upon viewers the most, is that kind of calm, sort of peaceful, at ease sort of feeling to it. And so it's easiest, I guess, in winter is one way to think about it. So yeah, I think
that leads me down a different path of questioning.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you'd mentioned that you're kind of seeking out those photographs that have the calmness imbued into them. Mm-hmm. Which totally, I get that. I'm looking for that too. But I'm curious, are you specifically seeking out that aesthetic, or would you avoid scenes that are more about like excitement or energy, or
no.
like different emotions that you're like? Do you have a preference?
No, I'll be honest with you. I don't really think about the emotions that much in the field.
Got it. Okay.
If I see something I want to photograph, I'll photograph it. When I was on the on the Oregon coast, I was, chasing waves and stuff. Because I agree, like you said before, like you're witnessing the power of nature. And especially if it's something you don't see a lot. Like I don't see massive waves crashing on Pacific Coast rocks, in Vermont. So no, I certainly wouldn't avoid it. And I would say even when I'm out in winter and the western part of Vermont is very wide open, big fields and stuff. And so that's kind of tends to be where I go. When I'm out there, I'm not really thinking calmness. I'm just naturally drawn to that aesthetic. And it's kind of like you do it without even thinking, so maybe on some subconscious level, I'm thinking about it, but I won't, I'll photograph anything, like I'll be out there and all of a sudden, bald eagle, then all of a sudden I'm trying to shoot a bald eagle, like I'm a little bit squirrel, type of thing. But yeah, so I think it's much less intentional than that. And I certainly don't shy away from photographing any particular scenes just because of the emotional impact it might have.
Yeah, and I wonder if that relates back to the whole work-life balance thing, and your work is so stressful and type A, and photography, it's like, I'm just looking for stuff that makes me peaceful.
Exactly. Yep. Just anything that grabs my eye, gets my attention. And, fortunately, we're in digital photography world, so we're not paying per sheet of film. And so you can be pretty loose and just photograph things. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So, as someone who's somewhat new to photography, at least in the nature space, where do you see it taking you and your photography in the future?
Good question. I think I'm always going to be curious. Like I said, I think so I'm always going to be open to new experiences. And so along those lines, I think I will start traveling more for photography. And so in the past, 8 months, and then, fast forward to February, I'm going to be out in Death Valley. I've traveled more in that period of time than I ever have in the previous, 4 or 5 years that I've been doing photography. So I think it's going to kind of get me traveling more, even though photographing close to home and locally is an important element of what I do. I think it's going to definitely push me to start doing things, getting me a little bit out of my comfort zone in that regard. I'm actually going to Greenland next fall. That's something that's kind of newly developing. So,
that's cool.
So I'm super pumped about that. That should be an awesome trip. So things like that, I think it's going to kind of get me out there and exploring the world a little bit more. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, if that's what you're going for with that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Are you hoping your photography culminates into something like a book, or are you just like wanting to capture images that you like? I mean, kind of what are some of your goals with the end product of your photography, if any?
Yeah, I can't say that honestly I have any goals. Would I like to put together a book someday? Absolutely, I would. I feel like with a project as big and important as that, you really have to be motivated. You really have to have that as a goal. So I don't really have it as a goal. I may do it someday. I may not. We'll see. I love teaching. I kind of talked about mentorship and mentoring that young kid that I've been working with a little bit. But then I don't really see myself running workshops either. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of nice to just have it be what it is and allow it to follow its own trajectory without really a goal or an endpoint in sight. And again, I think that speaks to the separation between my professional life, which has been completely goal driven since the time I was in high school, to this just being a little bit more free form and just see where it takes me and enjoying that process. It's led me to some awesome places, and yeah, it's been great.
Well, maybe this is a good tangent to talk a little bit about your connection and relationship with the National Forest Foundation, because that is something that you're doing with your photography to try to help make an impact. And maybe you can talk about what they do and how you got started with donating 100% of your print sales profits to that organization.
So the National Forest Foundation is a charitable organization that protects, rebuilds, and otherwise preserves public land in national forests, obviously, for public use. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of their mission statement. So as photographers, obviously, we collectively as a group spend a ton of time in the areas that they affect, they being the National Forest Foundation. So their work, I think, is incredibly important to photographers around the country, and I think it just dovetails nicely in that sense. They're doing what they are doing so that we can do what we do. So it seemed like a logical fit to support them. As far as choosing them, there's certainly a number of nature charities out there, but the National Forest Foundation is exceptionally well run. I think anytime that you donate to a charity, because I donate to a lot of other charities as well, outside of the photography world, and I always research them first. There's like CharityWatch.org. There's a number of organizations that actually will rank charities as far as basically how far your dollar goes, like how many cents for each dollar they give, how many cents go to actual projects or, whoever the intended recipient is. And so National Forest Foundation ranks exceptionally high, one of the best charities in the country as far as that's concerned. So out of all the environmental charities, I chose them really strictly because of that. And that's pretty much just been my relationship with them. As far as donating the profits, I'm very fortunate that, I have a profession that, allows me to do what I want to do with photography and not need to rely on getting anything monetarily in return for it. If I sell a print, I sell through a gallery up in northern Vermont, and I sell, I don't know, a couple of prints a month maybe. If I do, and at the end of the day I profit $100 or something, to me it's a lot better to put that back into the system that's allowing me to make these images rather than keep the $100. I'm pretty minimalist when it comes to my photography. I don't have a lot. In other words, I don't have a lot of ongoing expenses. I will stick with a camera platform for years and years. I have a handful of lenses. I'm not always buying lenses and tripods and all that stuff. I mean, I have decent equipment, but it's not like an ongoing cycle where I'm trying to constantly pay for the next latest, greatest thing. I keep my stuff for 4 or 5 years, and if I absolutely need to upgrade, I will. So I don't have it. I don't need to fund my ongoing photography hobby, whatever you want to call it, with print sales again. So that's another reason that it just made sense to give it back, keep these places open, make it so everybody can enjoy it. I don't think my photography directly is going to make an impact on conservation in the way that, obviously like somebody like Ansel Adams did. But if I can contribute in this way, all the better.
Yeah, I love that. Have there been any challenges that have arisen from your choice of donating 100% of your profits?
No, I don't think so. Again, I think maybe if I was constantly turning over equipment, or right. I was only creating photographs when I was traveling, like I had to get on a plane and fly somewhere to do it, and and then it'd be a bit of a financial drain. But I'm very fortunate in that sense that I can kind of do what I want, within reason, of course, and enjoy it that way and give back. So yeah, no, not really very many challenges.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's totally shift gears.
Let's do it.
I know that you're one of the co-hosts of the new YouTube channel Bruis and Views, which I think
the YouTube sensation.
That's right. Started by Eric Bennett, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was the impetus and kind of the creation process of Bruis and Views, and what has it been like for you to be a part of that?
Just a bunch of tomfoolery is what it is. It's the genesis of it. I wish it was something crazy profound. So I will say it's been awesome to be a part of it and get to know Eric really well, and Paul Bowman. Also, Jim Rodwall, who's also been on your podcast. I've actually known him for a while. He lives not very far from me over in New York, so I've known him for a while. So it's the four of us that started it. It was definitely Eric's idea. So the group kind of got together, honestly, just kind of haphazardly, because we are kind of situated in different parts of the country where we have access either directly to the breweries of really, really high-end beers, or we live in states that these breweries can ship to. That's how I got involved, because a lot of states will ship to Vermont. So it's kind of started out for like 6 or 8 months. That's kind of all it was. We would just kind of communicate back and forth, buy bottles for one another, when these things came out. And I got to be honest with you, when I started this, I really didn't know that much about beer. I don't really drink a lot. Didn't drink a lot of beer. I knew nothing about it. And Eric and Jim, all three of them really have encyclopedic knowledge about beer. And so I really kind of talking about imposter syndrome. Like I didn't really know. I was kind of bluffing it initially. And so, I learned a lot about beer from them. And then one random day, Eric's like, "Hey, do you think we should do a show where we just kind of, each crack a beer and like kind of go over some cool photos that we've seen recently?" And I was like, "It's a fantastic idea. We should absolutely do that." And so, Eric's got, a lot of skill with video editing and, that kind of production and things like that. So we kind of set it up and did it. And I think our first one is technically on the YouTube channel, but it was a little bit rough. But we've kind of refined it, went through the growing pains of technical difficulties with microphones and all that. And then obviously, because Eric is who he is, we've had some amazing guests on, Sarah Marino, Michael Bellino, Alex Noriega. We're probably by the time this podcast come out, it'll have already happened, but we're doing one with Hans Strand this coming weekend.
Yeah, fun.
So so it's been amazing to get access to these people, and to be able to converse with them and get to know them on a very personal level. That's very have fun, and that's kind of what we do, and that's really the intent of it. We're not making any money on it. It's just showcase some photographers. We always try to pick photographers that are kind of under the radar, lesser known, get their work out there, get them some exposure, just to kind of share stuff that people may not be seeing on their Instagram feed or anywhere else, hearing on podcasts. So that's a little bit of a kind of an ancillary goal that we have, but it's mostly just to have fun, hang out, and talk about the things we love, namely photography and good beer.
That resonates with me for sure.
Yeah, we got to get you on, definitely.
It's funny because when I first met Eric in person, we were talking, I don't know, this must have been 2019, 2020 maybe, and we were talking about craft beer, and he was like, "I don't really know that much about craft beer, I just like it." And now he's like obsessed with it.
It's insane. I mean, he just like somebody will like we'll be like on the show, and we usually hang out for a little while beforehand, and somebody will be like, Paul will open one and it'll be from some obscure brewery or something like that, and he just knows. Oh yeah, he's like, "That's Nelson and Citra hops. That's and Paul will be like, "I don't really know the ABV of this," and he's like, "Oh, it's 7.8." Like he just knows this stuff. Like he just, I mean, he's obviously an intelligent guy. I don't want to blow him up too much because I'll never hear the end of it. But like, he's obviously a very intelligent guy, so he kind of remembers these things and learns things pretty quick. So especially if a few years ago he wasn't all that into it, now he's like an encyclopedia. It doesn't really surprise me.
Yeah. How do you feel like the format for the show is going? I mean, I know. So in the Landscape Photographer Worldwide Discord channel, we talk about Bruis and Views every once in a while, and we're like, man, it's a lot of fun, but I don't know if I have enough time to watch the entire episode most of the time, right?
Yeah, I can honestly say I don't think I've watched the whole one all the way through, for sure. Definitely not. So we were actually joking about that. We were saying before how what movie? It's Gangs of New York. Everybody was like, "Oh, it's such a good movie, but it's so long. It's like 3 hours long or something like that." And that's Scorsese, and here we are prattling on for 3.5 hours. Like people are really going to watch that. So I don't think we certainly don't expect people to just sit down in front of their computer and just watch that start to finish. So I don't know. I think a lot of people have reached out to us and they're kind of like, "Yeah, I just treat it like a podcast. Like I'll have it on, while I'm editing photos. And when I hear a new photo come up, I'll click over and look at the photo and click back and edit some photos or do something else," which is cool. I think that's a good way to do it. I think we probably will start to trim them down a little bit. Our most recent episode was the shortest, at a minuscule 2 hours. I mean, honestly, what it is, Matt, is we have so much fun doing it. It's just a bunch of buddies hanging out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Busting each other's chops and having fun with it.
I just saw today an Instagram story from Bruis and Views, which I'm assuming is Eric, but basically it was like, we know not everyone is watching the whole episode, so we decided we would share a few like photos and snippets from the episode so that you can see the greatest hits or whatever.
Yep.
I thought that was a good idea.
It's a great idea. It was Eric's idea, and they'll do it. I think he's going to do it every Wednesday. So, yeah, he did that post. Normally, I'm the one actually doing the post on Bruis and Views when I can remember to do it. But you could tell from the lack of originality with the stories. But anyway, so he did that one today. That's kind of his idea. So we'll probably do that going forward. I think it's a great idea. Just a short little snippet, just to kind of highlight reel sort of thing.
Perfect. Do you have any secrets for hangover cures, given the amount of beer that you're required to drink while hosting the show? Yeah, no, fortunately, I haven't had to deal with hangovers in the recent past. But
No, nothing. Hydrate, right?
Yeah.
That's about all I got for you. Try not to get hungover. I think that's probably the best advice.
All right. Well, last question. Who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are some photographers maybe flying under the radar that we should know more about?
Yeah, definitely. So I had to narrow this list down. There's so many people I wanted to include on this. So I'll start with a local guy, Caleb Kenna. He lives next town north of me in Brandon, Vermont. He's been a photographer for decades. Did a lot of journalistic work in the 80s, was in Afghanistan. He still does assignments for the New York Times and things like that, but his focus now is predominantly nature photography. He does a lot of aerial photography, drone photography. He does a workshop, I think, with Kurt Budliger too, drone photography workshop in Vermont. And it's the only one he does. But just a fascinating guy, an immense body of work. He's kind of runs the gamut of different types of photography. So just an interesting person. I think he'd be, if he'd be willing to come on the show, he'd be an interesting guest because I'm sure he's got tons of stories from his experiences, doing photography over the decades. Next up, I had Abby. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right. Reeder, and maybe Rader, Raeder. She's also another Vermont photographer. She lives in Vermont, I think just part-time, but a phenomenally inspiring photographer. She does a lot of writing with her photography. And what I love about that is it just kind of gives you some insight into how she views and interacts with the world. It's like her photography certainly stands alone, but when you read what she writes about it, it's almost like it gives the photographs personality. And it's her ability to do that is fascinating. And I love her images, usually fairly abstract, fairly whimsical, just a really solid body of work, and a very, my relatively limited interaction with her, just a genuinely very nice person. So definitely check her out. She'd definitely be interesting to have on the show. Garrett Hess is another guy out of Erie, Pennsylvania that I've been following and definitely digging his work a lot lately. Relatively new to the scene. I think he's only been doing it a few years. What I love most about Garrett's work is, again, he's living in Erie, Pennsylvania. He doesn't travel a lot for his photography. He does a little bit. But he's just creating consistently good work, in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I definitely respect that. And every time I see his images, I definitely take a really good look at them, and they're very inspiring, and I love seeing his work, and I love seeing his progression over the past, I've only really been following him for a year, but he's kind of on this very steep part of that curve, and really putting out good stuff.
And I don't know about you, but I have a much higher appreciation of that type of photographer than, say, someone who visits like all the national parks and visits all the classic scenes in those parks, and maybe they come away with some really great photos of those classic scenes, but what are you contributing that's new or interesting?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, check out Garrett's work. I mean, it's really good stuff. You could tell he really is pushing himself creatively, and it really shows up well in his work. So awesome stuff there. Adrian Villa is a guy, not specifically a nature photographer, mostly nature, but he does include a lot of man-made stuff. You're probably familiar with him. He's got a fairly robust YouTube channel. Definitely different from what I typically do. He shoots almost exclusively square format, black and white. But what I love about him is his approach to photography. He just walks around these places, hardly ever uses a tripod, only if he's doing like a long exposure, just sees things, composes it, snaps a picture, and moves on. And it's not that he's being superficial, it's just he's just that process of just seeing something cool, grabbing the photo, lining it up, composing it well, and all of his work is very, very well composed. I just love his approach. To me, it's refreshing when I get into a kind of a rut. I watch his videos, when I'm overthinking my photography too much. I love watching his videos because he underthinks his photography. It's still amazing work, and his compositions are awesome, but he just kind of goes and just shoots and very simple editing and just puts stuff out there, very consistent. So definitely an interesting person, has a pretty big YouTube presence. I'd love to hear him on your show. I think he'd be an awesome guest. Nice. Lastly, Jesse Nelson is a photographer out of South Dakota. I really came across his work or spent more time going through his work when I was out in South Dakota, or really actually when I got home from South Dakota, and I saw all his images of the Badlands and wanted to destroy my SD cards because it's a phenomenal body of work. He's a fantastic photographer, really kind of under the radar.
That's Jesse Brown Nelson.
Jesse Brown.
Right?
Yeah, Jesse Brown Nelson. Yep. That's
yeah,
the
I've
guy.
been following him for a long time.
Yeah. So maybe I shouldn't say he's under the radar, but he.
No, but I mean, he's got 7,000 followers. I mean.
Yeah. So
awesome
I shouldn't say under. Yeah. No, they're definitely consistently good. Kind of runs the gamut. Some bigger landscapes, some more intimate scenes, but mostly out of South Dakota. So just really solid work. I love seeing his images pop up on my feed, and scroll through a lot of his images. Definitely inspiring. So worth checking out. Definitely worth talking to on the show.
Love it. Those are solid recommendations. Thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, all right, Mike. Well, this has been super fun, and I
Definitely
can't wait
has.
to hang out with y'all on Bruis and Views sometime.
Yeah, for sure. We'll get you on there in the very near future. We'll have a good time with that, no doubt.
All right, well, thank you to Mike for the super fun chat on the show today. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to take a look at his work. It's really, really fun stuff. As always, I'm on the prowl to hear your stories and your approaches to the craft. Don't be shy. Reach out so we can record those stories. Cheers. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.